Okay, the final lesson in Integrated Change Control, ICC. This is a final lesson in Integration Management, rather, ICC, Integrated Change Control. They're all important. All processes are important, especially if you want to sit for the certification exam. But to run a project, all processes are essential. But this is the granddaddy of them all, the big poopah. We perform ICC. It's the process of reviewing change requests, of approving of them, of managing them once they've been approved, so that the changes get incorporated into the deliverables we're trying to make. So this becomes an integrated approach for addressing overall project risk throughout the project. In fact, that's an interesting point, that risk is reduced when we implement the approved changes, and only the approved changes. We never implement changes that aren't approved, changes to our project management plan. Okay? So ICC is integrating these, bringing them together. And one of the key rules that I want to emphasize is that a change in one area, I mean the management plans, the scope plan, the cost plan, the risk plan, is always evaluated for its impact on all other management plans. A change in one management plan is evaluated for its impact on the other management plans. Very important point. I also like, and I also want to mention that before baselines are built, changes are not required, right, until you have a baseline. But once I have my formal baseline approved, now and it's part of the project plan, now I have to go through ICC, Integrated Change Control, to change that baseline. Okay. A change request can be approved, it can be deferred, it can be rejected. Usually the project sponsor, the project manager is involved in that. The project manager is setting up the change control board. You'll have a change control board, which you will set up in your change management plan in advance of the project, so you'll know who's on it. You'll have the change process defined in advance. You'll have a change control log, and that log is where you'll record the approved, rejected, deferred changes. You always record, even a rejected change, you file the documentation because it will come up again. One of the things I want to ask is, what has changed in context? So, common questions about performing integrated change control. Who's responsible? Well, the PMBOK guide would always say the project manager is responsible for integrated. So, and you're heavily proactive. Are change requests formal or informal? This is a formal process. Who can request changes? Any stakeholder could request changes as long as they use the process. Who makes decisions to approve or reject change? Well, that you would have defined in your project management plan and maybe in your change management plan. The project manager or the sponsor or the CCB itself. So you might say on a multi-million-dollar project, you know what? Any change under $10,000, the project manager can decide. Any change between $10,000 and $100,000, the sponsor can approve. And any change over $100,000 requires the change control board to vote. Okay, those are key stakeholders that participate to vet these changes. And so another question is, a stakeholder wants to add scope to a project. You estimate that it will add 2 weeks to the duration. What do you do next? Do you say no? Well, maybe it's a very important change. The answer to almost every question in project management begins with, let me analyze first. That's a root answer in project management. Let me analyze first. Okay? So this is a graph that I have just sketched. Eventually I will turn that into a formal picture, but that's going to take some work. But it defines everything they're discussing on page 115 and following of the PMBOK guide. If you have no baselines, you don't need an integrated change control. there are a couple of key inputs into integrated change control. One is the configuration management plan. Well, those are items that are configurable, or that you baseline, that you must manage what level we're on. And then once baseline, now ICC becomes required. So we have the baseline plan, which is going to focus on identifying and approve changes. And all those feed into the integrated change control, which is going to tie to your CCB down below, your change control board. Then once the change control board approves, defers, or rejects the change after some data analysis that you provided as the PM, you may involve other experts. You may update the plan of the project documents. Voting, we talked about unanimous, majority, plurality. Those can be involved. Once that happens, you want to communicate the change to everybody. Stakeholders want to know, especially for the three baselines: scope, schedule, and cost. To the customer, the sponsor, and all the stakeholders. You want to update the project plan, and you want to implement the changes by updating the documents. You want to notify key stakeholders, and that sort of thing. So I think it's a good slide. It kind of ties it all together, but not ready yet for prime time. Okay. But I thought it was worth discussing. So integrated change control then. Moving on to the inputs, page 116. Include the project plan, of course, which you might then consider the change management plan, because that's going to provide direction to your CCB, your change control board. Remember, you as the project manager built the project plan. You built the change management plan. These were your inputs that were approved by the sponsor to run your project. And it's going to give direction to the configuration management we just talked about in the baselines. Now we have the project documents, which are going to provide, for example, a basis of estimates. What were your justification for estimates if you're looking to change them? And of course, your requirements traceability matrix. All requirements on the project should be traced back to what drives the requirement. They're just not ad hoc. We want to make sure that because otherwise I end up with scope creep. My scope changes without intending to change. Well, when the scope changes, I haven't added cost or anything else. It's going to impact my schedule and other things. As an input, it's work performance reports, which include resource availability, schedule and cost data, earned value reports, and those sort of things. And now I have my change request. That's an input. So from the direct and manage project work, an output was a change request. This is where it's an input. From my knowledge management process we just talked about, an output was a change request. This is where it becomes an input. From monitor and control process, which was the last process we just talked about, one of the outputs was change request. Boom. This is where they all go, right here, change requests. Then, of course, I want to consider EEFs and OPAs. More on that in the PMBOK guide if you want to review those, particular to this process. Now, in my tools, I have my expert judgment. We've been over that many times. My change control tools, right? So, in order to facilitate configuration and change management, manual and automated tools may be used. Configuration control is focused on the specification of both the deliverables and the processes, while change control is focused on identifying, documenting, and approving and rejecting change requests. So a little bit about each of those. There's a data analysis, which identifies alternatives, or as I used to say in the military, COAs, or courses of action. What courses of action am I going to take in this change request process as I assess the changes? And what's my cost-benefit analysis as part of my data analysis? And then, of course, there's decision-making, the voting. It could be autocratic, you will, or multi-criteria decision-making, as we've discussed before in meetings. Now, The outputs are the approved change requests, which is pretty self-explanatory, and that's going to go back as an input to the direct and managed project work. If you look at the inputs of direct and managed project work, you will see approved change requests. Okay? And with that approved change request, you'd update the project plan and project documents. Remember, integrated change control, it's kind of a big deal, to quote Ron Burgundy from the movie Anchorman. Okay? This is Andy Molnar's summary of integrated ICC process. You want to prevent. If you can't prevent a change, you want to identify the potential change. Always analyze first, look at the impact. If you need to, create a change request, conduct integrated change control. The results are then communicated. You want to update your documents and manage stakeholder expectations. To me, this is Andy Molnar's view of a one-slide summary of what just happened. And then the final process is closing project, close phase, project, or contract. Okay. In closing, remember projects are temporary and unique, so by temporary they will close. They're not operations. Okay. So closure ensures the transfer of deliverables to the project or team owner, and then they have to be signed for. Okay. So we want to make sure that early work is complete. And it's also possible to terminate early. We'll talk more about that later. Early termination is possible. Especially with contracts, it can be for cause or convenience is the term, as long as that's written into the contract. Okay, cause or convenience. So remember the charter or the inputs here is the project plan and project documents in the closed project. The charter is also an input. I don't think I have it listed there, so please add that there, pen that in, the charter, because that defines my high-level success, what I'm looking at. My plan, my more detailed success, or what I'm looking at. Project documents, including the assumptions log, my basis of estimates, my change log, my issues log, my lessons learned register, which is an output from the knowledge process we just talked about, and accepted deliverables. That is very important. My outputs are my tools. I'm going to use my expert judgment. I'm going to take all this data that I collected and go have a meeting with the customer and see if they accept it and sign for it. And my outputs are my final product handed over, and they'll sign for it. I'll finalize all my reports so my data is clear, and I'll do OPA updates. So the last thing I want to do is discuss how three processes relate to each other. So I will do in 8.3, we haven't covered it yet, that's control quality. I'm looking for correctness or specifications. Sometimes in the military we call it specs. In my passing inspection, once it's correct per the requirements and quality standard, then I'll go to validate scope, another process we're going to have here in the next few weeks, which is getting the customer to formally accept the deliverables, either in the process phase or project. Then I'm ready to go to close phase or contract and have the customer sign it off. And that's kind of how the three of those relate together. Okay, that is all for today. And that concludes this week 2 lecture. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck. I will see you in the discussion board and elsewhere.